April 19th, 1775. Dawn breaks over the small Massachusetts towns of Lexington and Concord. The air is cold, the mist still clinging to the fields, and on the village green a handful of colonial militiamen stand facing a column of British redcoats. Nobody can say who fires the first shot, but in that split second, history changes forever. The crack of a musket echoes across New England, and the American Revolution begins. At that time, the 13 colonies along the Atlantic coast were loyal subjects of King George III, but years of tension had worn the relationship thin. The British Parliament had taxed the colonies without giving them a voice, demanded obedience, and stationed troops on American soil. Yet the Americans had grown confident, self-reliant, and unwilling to kneel. They were farmers, merchants, and craftsmen who had tasted liberty and would not surrender it. When the news of the fighting at Lexington and Concord raced through the colonies, the response was electric. Men dropped their plows, grabbed their muskets, and marched toward Boston. From all corners came volunteers calling themselves the Continental Army. In June 1775, George Washington, a tall Virginian known for his calm discipline, was chosen as their commander-in-chief. Washington inherited an army brave in spirit but poor in supplies, no uniforms, little gunpowder, and almost no training. Yet in his steady hands they would become the instrument of independence. The first major clash came that same month at Bunker Hill. The British, proud and professional, charged uphill 3 times before finally forcing the colonials to retreat, but at a terrible cost. The Americans had stood their ground and bloodied one of the world's most powerful armies. The message was clear: the colonies would not bow easily. By 1776, the struggle had outgrown its original goal of fair treatment. The fight was now for complete independence. On July 4, 1776, the Continental Congress in Philadelphia adopted the Declaration of Independence, words drafted by Thomas Jefferson that thundered across the world. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. That day, 13 colonies proclaimed themselves the United States of America, and the war became not a rebellion but the birth of a new nation. However, declaring freedom and securing it were 2 very different things. The British returned in force. In the summer of 1776, a massive fleet sailed into New York Harbor, the largest expeditionary force Britain had ever sent overseas. Redcoats filled the streets, warships crowded the bay, and their drums echoed off the island's cliffs. Washington's young army fought bravely but was outnumbered and outgunned. One battle after another pushed them backward. By winter, they were beaten, hungry, and retreating across New Jersey. It was at this darkest hour that Washington made one of the boldest moves in military history. On the icy night of December 25, 1776, he led his men across the freezing Delaware River. Their boots left blood on the snow. Their clothes were in tatters, but they attacked the Hessian garrison at Trenton with complete surprise. The victory was swift and stunning. Days later, they struck again at Princeton. These triumphs, small on paper, rekindled the American spirit. The world saw that the fight for liberty was far from over. In 1777, British General Burgoyne planned to crush the rebellion by isolating New England. His army marched south from Canada, confident of an easy campaign. But in the dense forests of upstate New York, American forces under Horatio Gates and the fiery Benedict Arnold blocked his advance. At Saratoga, the British suffered a humiliating defeat and surrendered an entire army. That victory was the turning point of the war. For the first time, Europe took the American cause seriously. France, Britain's old rival, recognized the United States and entered the war as its ally. Soon, French ships and soldiers crossed the Atlantic to stand beside the Americans. While diplomacy shifted abroad, endurance was tested at home. The winter of 1777 to 1778 at Valley Forge became a symbol of American resilience. In the Pennsylvania wilderness, Washington's army shivered in huts made of logs, wrapped in rags, short of food and medicine. Many died, but those who survived emerged stronger. Under the training of Prussian officer Baron von Steuben, the ragged volunteers became a disciplined fighting force. When spring came, they were no longer merely patriots, they were soldiers. Meanwhile, the war spread south. The British hoped to rally loyalists in the Carolinas and crush the rebellion from below. At first, their strategy seemed to work. Charleston fell and American forces suffered defeats. Yet in the backwoods and swamps, local militias fought a savage guerrilla war. Leaders like Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox, struck fast and vanished, bleeding the enemy day by day. The American spirit burned on, refusing to die. By 1781, both sides were exhausted, but Washington saw an opportunity. With the help of French General Rochambeau and the powerful French fleet under Admiral de Grasse, he moved south to trap the British Army, led by Lord Cornwallis at Yorktown, Virginia. The plan was daring: coordinate land and sea forces to encircle the enemy completely. As cannons thundered and trenches crept closer, Cornwallis's position collapsed. On October 19, 1781, the British surrendered. Drums rolled, flags lowered, and the band played a tune called "The World Turned Upside Down." After 6 years of blood and sacrifice, America had won. Even then, peace did not come instantly. It took 2 more years of negotiation before Britain finally recognized the independence of the United States in the Treaty of Paris, signed in 1783. The boundaries of the new nation stretched from the Atlantic to the Mississippi River. The world watched in awe. A group of colonies had defied an empire and triumphed. The American Revolutionary War was more than a military conflict. It was an idea de the belief that ordinary people could govern themselves, that freedom was worth fighting for, and that nations need not be born of kings. America had stood against one of the mightiest powers on earth, and had not only survived, but prevailed. The cost had been immense. Tens of thousands dead, towns burned, families divided, a continent scarred. Yet out of that struggle rose a republic founded on liberty. In the years that followed, veterans returned to their farms and workshops, hoping to live in the peace they had earned. George Washington, the man who had carried the Revolution on his shoulders, refused a crown and returned to his home at Mount Vernon. His quiet retirement spoke louder than any speech. The commander who could have been king chose instead to be a citizen. The Revolution also ignited a fire beyond America's borders. Across the world, people watched the United States and wondered if they too could break free. The French Revolution would soon follow, and Latin American independence movements later echoed the same cry: liberty, equality, self-determination. The United States had not only created a new country, it had changed the global conversation about power and rights forever. Of course, the young republic was far from perfect. The same ideals of freedom that inspired revolution also exposed contradictions. Slavery persisted, Native American lands were taken, and political divisions quickly grew. Yet even with these flaws, the revolutionary generation had built something enduring: the framework of a democracy that could correct itself, evolve, and expand its promise over time. When we look back on those years between 1775 and 1783, we see more than battles and dates. We see a transformation of identity. At Lexington, Americans were subjects of a distant king. By Yorktown, they were citizens of a self-made nation. The journey from rebellion to republic was messy, bloody, and uncertain, but through it all, the belief in liberty remained unshaken. The Revolution's legacy lives on in every act of self-government, in every peaceful transfer of power, in every voice that demands justice. It reminds us that freedom is not given, it is earned. Sometimes with ink, sometimes with blood, always with courage. 2.5 centuries later, the echo of that first musket shot still rings. It tells us that a handful of farmers and tradesmen once stood against the greatest empire of their age and dared to dream of something better. They fought not for conquest, but for a principle, that all people have the right to govern themselves. And in winning that fight, they did more than create a country. They created an idea strong enough to outlive them all. That idea, the United States of America, was born on the fields of Lexington, tempered in the snows of Valley Forge, and crowned at Yorktown. It is a story of endurance, unity, and vision. A story of how a nation, forged in defiance, became a beacon to the world. And it all began on that quiet April morning in 1775, when a single shot was fired. The shot heard round the world.